Here we go again, looking at another Isekai franchise in some vain hope to understand what the actual hell the appeal is, get a bit of context, and see what it's done for the medium of anime. I know it often comes off that I hate Isekai as a concept, but it's more that I don't understand the draw, especially with such a rigid and predictable formula. You know, like how there's probably a picture of the series coming up that'll be hit with something in a few seconds. I'd like to call that foreshadowing, but due to how often it happens, it's just expected at this point, so it's practically a cliche. Anyway, people have been begging me to look at older Isekai, so let's look at one of the oldest I could find today and see how far the whole genre's come. Before Sword Art Online, Log Horizon, and Overlord consisted of what we know as Isekai, Japan had this whole shit figured out ages ago, and today's series is the Australopithecus afarensis that we've so desperately been searching for. That's right, I name-dropped this anime back in the first video of this series, so it's time we take a look at the OG Isekai, or a battler Dunbine. Oh, there it is. And you thought this joke wasn't gonna have a payoff. If you're expecting me to say this started as a web novel, you'd be terribly mistaken. Or a battler Dunbine began life as an anime from its inception. That's right, you see kids, back in the day before all these self-publishing platforms sprouted up on the internet, or hell, before the internet, series were written by actual scriptwriters. If it wasn't a manga adaptation or already published book that was sent to publishers on physical paper through this weird system called the Post, it wasn't going to get discovered and adapted. The anime industry essentially created its own work pretty damn frequently back then, which is probably scary sounding, since most anime coming out these days are manga and light novel adaptations, especially when original series coming out are few and far between, and usually suck. But this was the early 80s, where everything goes. So the studio Sunrise took a risk on the man, the myth, the legend, Tomino Yoshiyuki's concept. If you haven't heard, he's the goddamn father of the real robot genre in Japan, which is basically the more technology-focused mecha series as we'd understand them today. Street cred? He's got it. This is the man who created Gundam. Literally, he created the entire Gundam franchise. So we have a practical anime god deciding he wasn't satisfied just creating an entire subgenre of mecha, and thought he'd do his best to kick off the whole in another world thing proper in anime. Well, at least he tried. A for effort, right? Alright, so, or a battler Dunbine. Where people like to argue if stuff like SAO and dot hack are isekais, there's no gray area here. This series is an isekai in the most traditional sense. A guy who likes to ride his crotch rocket was out for an evening of harassment going horribly wrong when these dudes straight up try to kill him. But Truck-kun was just a bystander this time at least, probably scarring him for the rest of his life and leading to his terrible choices later on. Don't worry, Truck-kun, you'll get your chance. I just love how batshit insane anime was back then. That this all happens a minute into the first episode with no monologue or anything. If this had been made today, we would have had the dude talking to us for 5 minutes about how he's just some normal otaku or some shit. Oh, and there would have been like 30 cuts of him weaving through traffic before finally disappearing, probably off a cliff. Old anime just threw you into the thick of it and expected you to catch on. Our main character here is summoned to another world just like that, dropped off after being pulled there by some fairy woman who's promptly locked up. Damn, even in fantasy worlds they need some prison reform. So, what's it like? Well, it's an isekai, so take a wild guess. Oh, that's right, class. This is a medieval fantasy world with your standard European aesthetic. That means wooden houses, stone castles, swords, knights, unicorn war steeds, and freight-loading cranes. You want to go back there for a second? Think my eyes are playing tricks on me. Oh, it's gone? Never mind, must have been me. Turns out our boy Sho was brought here with 2 other people from Earth. Well, more like abducted, but that's semantics. They're taken in by a regional lord to fight in a brewing war for control over the entire world. That's right, the protagonist is a linchpin in a plan for world domination. But why them? Well, people from Earth have the ability to control some magical force called aura. Hence the title, Aura Battler Dunbine. They use this aura to control massive mech robots to fight against armies, monsters, And other mechs? I thought controlling aura was special, why are there more mechs? Never mind, the series lost coherency when the main villain sold the mech technology to build a reasonable threat as a pretense for war, rather than just dominating with his superior military might. But when Sho starts thinking with his dick for a bit, he realizes working for an evil tyrant in the making isn't that great, and decides to switch sides, becoming the shining beacon of hope for this world. So there we have it. It fits my hyper-focused and probably disingenuous definition of Isekai too. We have a guy in another world using his amazing power to control the Force. Sorry, aura, to make the whole damn place revolve around him. That sounds like something we'd see released next season, not something from 40 years ago. So what's the big deal? What did Dunbine do for anime and Isekai? Well, it's the oldest Isekai anime I've been able to find. It was the first to take characters from our world and put them somewhere else that made them special, allowing for maximum self-insertion for the audience to believe that they're special too. It definitely goes to show why this formula has some staying power. For innovation, that's a bit trickier. While it's one of the first anime to do the whole in another world thing, it's less of a true blue isekai. Let me explain, because while it is an isekai, spiritually, it's not one. It fits the tropes, but this isn't so much a story about going to another world. Dunbine was created in the Mecha Renaissance, when Goliath franchises were sprouting up and dominating Japanese media, even breaking into the Western sphere. And Dunbine is no exception. While it fits all the tropes of isekai, Dunbine, at its core, is a mecha series with an isekai coat of paint. You can tell that pretty easily by how much it focuses on the technology, weaponry, and, well, the robots themselves. The series fillets the robot aspect a bit too much, and it feels out of place when combined with the otherwise low technology setting and aesthetic. Hell, a key plot point in this series is another guy came earlier than them and is building modern technology in that world, essentially jumping them centuries into the future in a short span of time. You can even chalk that up as another trope this series was hitting before it was even a trope, turning a fantasy world modern with knowledge from our world. But while that's justification for why it exists, it doesn't make it any less jarring and begs the question, why? Why any of this actually? When looking at the time period, it makes more sense. Dunbine is in a weird place. While it's clearly a mecha series first and foremost, it's also an isekai. It has all the tropes we'd associate with what would become the genre, but sidelined for another trend that was more popular around its release. Though, regardless of that, it takes the spot as one of the first ones anime viewers would get exposed to. If it needs spelled out what it did for the genre, well, it gave it its first wide exposure in the medium. That alone would be reason enough to talk about it, but that wasn't all. Specifically, it established a lot of tropes we would see later on that have become staples of the genre. Looking back on it after having seen so many modern isekai examples, it's honestly a bit shocking how many cliches there are. Ones even people think are what make an isekai today. Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and do all the other YouTube stuff to help the channel grow. You can also check out my Discord with a link down in the description. And if you really want to support me, you can head on over to my Patreon to pick up some extra perks like voting on what I do next. Thanks for watching.